Hey folks, Joe Shead here. You can go days without finding a shed antler, but there's ways to make your search a little bit more efficient. Here's 5 tips that can really help you find a lot more sheds. One of the first tips that most shed hunters learn is to look along fence lines for antlers. The impact of a buck jumping and landing on the ground will often knock an antler loose. Here we've got a heavy deer trail that's going into an agricultural field, and if you look just on the other side of the fence, there's a shed laying here. No doubt this buck jumped, and when he landed, the impact knocked this antler off of his head. In farm country, pay attention to which fields the deer are using. A hot crop field might attract dozens of deer. If you can get access to this property, you may be able to find a lot of sheds. Finding a food source is always a good way to find shed antlers. One of my very favorite tips is to look underneath lone evergreens. Now, when I say lone evergreens, we might be talking about, a single cedar tree out in the middle of a pasture, or we might be talking about a few random evergreens interspersed in a deciduous forest. Something that just kind of stands out. So over here, here's what we got. Now, this is what I'm talking about. You can see that there's not just one evergreen here. You can see that there's a bunch of them around here. But we got a cedar tree all by itself, kind of isolated from the other trees. Cedar trees are great because they catch the snow up in the branches, so there'll be less snow underneath for the deer to bed under. And they love to eat them too. So, you can see, there are evergreens in the area, but this is just kind of by itself, kind of isolated. And when the deer bed underneath this, they're almost always going to be underneath the south side. Here we got a little shed underneath it. So that's what I'm talking about. These lone evergreens, whether it's just, one or two here and there, or whether they're, just scattered around throughout a deciduous forest, check them out, because deer will go out of their way to bed underneath them. And you also find that, coyotes and stuff like that, a lot of times you'll find a deer leg bone or something where a coyote's been bedding underneath that tree, chewing on a deer leg or something, because it's something that stands out in the landscape that animals can relate to. So check those out for sure. One thing that I really key on when I'm shed hunting is I'm looking for conifer trees. And, in my area where I live, we don't really have a lot of agriculture. So the deer are really dependent on forest. So the conifers provide cover from the wind and from the snow. Depending on the area you live in, it could be white cedar like we've got here. It could be red cedar. It could be some kind of pine. Just whatever you have in your area. The deer will go in these areas. If you have snow in your area, the snow will get caught up in the branches, so there'll actually be less snow underneath the trees. Makes it easier for deer to find food, and it makes it easier for them to travel too. So let me show you what we got here for an example. So you can see here we've got a cedar edge here. It's a pretty thick forest overall, and it's one thing to walk through the forest and look for antlers, but your best bet is going to be on an edge. Now here we've got the southern edge, so you can see the snow is mostly melted off out here. So the sunlight hits this area first, melts the snow, makes it a little warmer for the deer. And a lot of the places that you'll find a shed, and I just planted this one just for sake of example, but this would be a pretty typical spot to find one, would be right on the southern edge of a forest like this, conifer forest. This is a place that I would expect to find a shed, something like that, right on the edge with the south facing exposure. Probably the number one consideration for the areas I hunt, and again, I'm not looking in agricultural areas, so it's a little different, but for me, I'm keying in on south-facing slopes. And a slope, it could be a mountain out in the Rockies, or it could be a 3-foot hump in the middle of a swamp, just something that gives the deer a little bit of elevation. They love to bed on a hill. Let me show you a little bit what I mean here. Okay, in this situation, I've got a little creek next to me here, and we got a little hill. And as you can see up on top of the hill here, it's completely bare right now. This is a southern exposure. Now if I look over on this hill, the north slope of this little hill, there's still snow there because that area was more shady. This hillside here got more direct sunlight all winter long. The deer go up there, they're like cats. So, a cat sitting in the windowsill. They'll go up there and they'll bed, take advantage of that radiant heat from the sun. And it's easier to find food and travel because there's less snow. So we got this nice hillside here. You can see a little bit got some droppings here, and then here's an antler right here. Perfect place for a deer to bed and food, find food and travel as well. South facing hillside, no matter if it's a tall one or a small one, deer love those southern exposures on hillsides. Well, these 5 tips will really help you out to find more antlers, especially if you're new to the sport and have never found a shed before. If you're really looking for a more thorough resource, check out my book. It's called Shed Hunting, A Guide to Finding Whitetail Deer Antlers. You can get that at goshedhunting.com. Otherwise, when it comes down to it, you're basically looking for bedding areas and feeding areas. And as you find more sheds and walk around in the woods more often, pay attention to what you're seeing. Every time you find a shed, try to ask yourself, why was that buck there? What was he doing? And the more you do that, the more you pay attention to details, the easier it becomes to find sheds. I'm Joe Shead, and thanks for watching Joe Shead Outdoors.